So think of the being as being a collection of values. Values are not necessarily specified thoughts, although they can be specified what they are. We value compassion, we value justice, we value integrity, and so forth. But they are sort of predispositions that come from our, what we might want to group together call soul, our being. That constitutes perhaps our soul. And it is this being, these propensities, these values, that we individually have a particular selection and emphasis and pattern of, and relationship with, interrelationship of, that does change through time, but is, if you like, more or less ongoing through time with modification. We change. That determines the ideas we're attracted to drawing into the mind. And so we speak and act accordingly. And of course learn and reflect, and our values are adjusted by the experience of this living via the medium of or the domain of thought. What we think about this, how we react to it, and how this feeds back to the soul as regards adjustment, perhaps, or hardening, which is another form of adjustment, isn't it? Now, in this sense, each person is a valid, or a surviving, should I say, at least from the point of view of, we're pretty clear they're surviving if we see someone, living and breathing body. They're a particular collection of the feasible and consistent enough to support life as we recognize it, whether that's just physical or physical and spiritual, or just spiritual, which some of us might not recognize at all. We just say, oh, that's a load of rubbish. You're either dead or alive, and you're blood and water and bone and so on, And what we're saying is, in our reflection, philosophizing, is that some of these souls are happy and some are not, and most of us would pursue happiness and peace and joy and life as we understand it, and all sorts of things that we do all value. Many of the values we have in common. Most of us value living. You tend not to stay long if you don't, and so forth. But there are some collections of values that are far more successful in achieving, if you like, your more important values, the ones that you find more important, or should, from the point of view of survival. And you might not value such at the minute, but you might well at times in the future, when you find all your friends hate you or something, because of something or other. So there is in our mind, well, perhaps there's an ideal, and perhaps he exists, and perhaps he doesn't. But we can imagine an ideal, and we may as well, assume for a moment that it's something that we could label God, and he either does or doesn't exist. But there's uncertainty, so we're not sure. But possibilities and probabilities, and the degree to which we would value such a being if he had the following properties. So we make a view of God in our own image. We can only love what we value at present. But there's a longing, perhaps, a longing for life to be better, that, in some sense this soul that we have is not actually happy. It's not sitting there in bliss, that's the mind is oblivious to it. It's, on the contrary, it's in a state of being that wants more. More peace, more joy, more hope, more love, more goodness, whatever it sees goodness to be. And it's looking round for ways of achieving this. Example is one of them. This man seems very happy and successful. Perhaps I should be like him. This great lawyer or physician or something. Or this one seems to be blissfully happy. He's sitting in a cave and seems to have mastery over the elements. Even perhaps he exists, perhaps he doesn't, but the possibility of him exists in my mind, so that could be having quite a profound effect on me, and I could say visions of him and all the rest of it. I'm not saying this stuff's fake. I'm just saying it's part of the hungering of the soul, and it might manifest itself in our thoughts and our hopes and our way of living in all sorts of ways. Okay, let me pause there. And probably all of us are confronted with some things we value about a person and some things we think, well, that can't be true, or I don't agree with that, but practicing so-and-so has had a very good effect, and I go on that, and I don't quite see him as an avatar, but I've got a principle that perhaps there shouldn't be anyone between me and God, because he might just cloud the issue, but I am allowed good friends, and I'm open to advice and rationality, as far as I understand it to be rational, of course, and so forth. Do you see? It's all valid. The story is valid. In what sense is it valid? It's blessing me no end. My life's never been so happy as since I met Jesus. And some of us apparently even met him in form. He came and talked to me. What was he wearing? Well, I don't know. He's wearing normal jumper and trousers like any other bloke would, Or no, he was dressed in white, mate, with, and so forth. But it is valid. Steiner's right. It's the imagination that it's gleaning. It's out there gleaning in the fields. It's looking for treasure that it wants to collect and add to itself amongst all the possible and the impossible. The distinction is not black and white between possible and impossible. It's probable and improbable of some degree. Somewhere between that 0 and 1 boundary, no possibility and certainty. We are not certain of either, meeting either boundary. We can't quite get there. What's the thing that's absolutely certain? Descartes hoped it was I think, therefore I live. But then, he woke up, found he was dreaming, and was dead. Well, in which case he wasn't dreaming and he wasn't thinking. Did he then not exist? Oh my goodness, perhaps the soul is ongoing. And perhaps it's not now I think, therefore I am. Perhaps I am, and the manifestation of being can be thought, but it might not be. I might stop thinking for a while when I'm asleep, assuming I'm not even dreaming, and I might not think for a while when the brain is not receiving anything, but I still am. In some soul context, I might still be the same being, this possible collection of values that would have, and does have, if you like, a propensity, a need, a drive, a searching, a longing, a dynamism, a volition, what we call life, purpose, a propensity to evolve, a soul is can be described as at least, but possibly is far more than, a collection of values that imply a propensity to do something, to want, to have a volition, purpose, drive, will, whether it has thought or not. That the will is something of the soul, not necessarily of the thought. The thought can call up the will in some sense to mind in that understanding. Now, we are children compared to God's soul, is in a sense what I'm saying. And we are perhaps seeded by some rationality of God. No, let's not quite say that. We are seeded by certain values from God, one of which is to value living, life, to value purpose, propensity, to have desire, or the propensity for desire. We must have some measure of integrity, consistency, some love of peace and order. If we love chaos and disorder, we're not going to live very long, are we? We'll achieve no further development, but just a deterioration. In other words, we must have an aversion to decay, especially our own, and anything that causes it as we see it. So there's certain core values that we, if you like, are born with as souls. And in the Genesis Hebrew story, God breathes into it life. That sounds like, well, it sounds like air and the ability to operate through the body. So is it that he breathes in the soul itself, or does he breathe in? I think so. He breathes in initial spirit. It kick-starts the massive material he's put together, the dust of the earth, Adam, and he becomes a living soul now. He's got, or he makes, not sure if he makes of himself parts of his, that we're a spark of the divine, or he makes of the structure of the soul and then breathes in some of his values, his spirit. But not all of his spirit, of course. That would just be... Well, he puts in something that has a foundational potential to develop in many magnificent ways. In fact, a propensity to develop in all ways. And then it's the childhood thing that with love and care and further spiritual input by those around the child give him enough for survival, and he starts to stand on his own feet and have a will of his own that, well, sometimes is just a tantrum, but sometimes is quite effective. He eats happily and then snuggles up and goes to sleep. So we are children of God in that sense. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Dad.